Hello, today I'm here with Changmin Yu, who is part of the first cohort of the Foundational AI CDT at UCL, where he did computational neuroscience. His thesis was titled Hippocampus-Inspired Representation Learning for Artificial Agents, and I'm excited to dig into the interaction between neuroscience and AI with him today. Welcome, Changmin.
Right. Thank you, Ruben.
So, at a high level, what was your thesis about?
So, my PhD thesis is about two things. It's mainly centered around the study of the hippocampus, which is a brain region in rodent and also preserved in humans like primates and all those species that host the affords the cognitive functions of either spatial cognition, spatial navigation, or just episodic memory, long-term memory, those kind of mnemonic functions. And so I specifically study hippocampus from two angles. One is to build mathematical or machine learning models, theories behind how hippocampal neurons actually support computations of spatial navigation through their firings, through their neural representations. And I have specifically been using methods such as spectral theory or Bayesian or parametric methods for building theories around that. And on the other hand, I have actually also been taking inspirations from how hippocampal neurons specifically, there's a so-called thing called hippocampal replay, where you can actually see that, during resting or during sleeping, the hippocampal neurons, they actually get reactivated in the same trajectories as they experienced during active motions, active locomotions in their previous experiences. And I've been taking this replay strategy and translate them into novel learning paradigms for reinforcement learning agents and try to see the generality of upholded by these kind of mechanisms in improving learning overall, improving generalizability of learning specifically. And turns out they did. And so that's the gist of my thesis. So two things, right? It's really using machine learning to model neural systems and also to take neural inspirations to build better machine learning algorithms.
So, machine learning can help us understand how the hippocampus works.
Yeah. So I have been so for that there are two things. I mean, even under this direction, there are actually two specific um, niche subfields. So one is the so-called normative theory, normative modeling, where we actually use machine learning methods to build learning algorithms that analyze the neural system, how the neural computations support optimal or near optimal cognitive functions. So what kind of objective functions they are trying to optimize, and what kind of neural architectures they're taking, and well, not specific neural architecture, not on the implementation level down to, for instance, the ion channels or those kinds of things, but really on the high level, for instance, the neural representations. There's a thing called hippocampal play cells where you can actually see that the animal fires in really unimodal location within a spatial enclosure. And there's also a thing called grid cells where they actually have the firing fields lined up in a hexagonal grid within the environment, which is amazing. So we want to see what kind of learning algorithms or what kind of objective that they are trying to optimize could lead to the emergence of these neural representations, and then how these neural representations could be deemed optimal for these tasks. Okay, so that's the normative side. And on the other side, there is also a descriptive perspective where we want to have some unbiased characterization of the neural firing, of the population neural firing. Because I mean, neural spiking is such a volatile, noisy process, and we need advanced representation learning methods for making sense of it, essentially, try to interpreting the neural data. And so we have been with Manish at the Gatsby, Manish Sahani at the Gatsby, and we have been developing quite a few representation learning methods, mostly based on probabilistic machine learning, Bayesian methods to to build this kind of a latent variable models to project the high dimensional population spikings into some low dimensional uh, latent neural manifolds, if you want to call it that, and then to understand the neurodynamics on this manifold.
Okay, so on the one side, you've got this technique to try and understand the hippocampus. And then the flip side of that is to try and use ways in which the hippocampus is functioning, such as by replaying memories,
Yeah.
to improve RL algorithms, reinforcement learning
Yeah.
algorithms. Could you explain a bit how that works?
Um, okay, of course. So my motivation has always been generalization. So I'm very interested in generalization. I think that's one of the things that really tells biological intelligence and artificial intelligence apart. That humans or any actually even like rodents, even simpler organisms, they can actually learn within a very few number of demonstrations and also like trial and errors to actually, and then they can generalize their skills across different domains, modalities, and task configurations, and very robustly. And there's little memory interference and so on and so forth. And hippocampus has actually been believed to support the so-called model-based reinforcement learning, where you actually do reinforcement learning based on a learned world model, which is a very popular term these days. Uh, so the idea is just how do we, or if some of the firing properties of the hippocampal neurons actually they lead to they are sufficiently general to actually to benefit machine learning algorithms as well in a similar way, whether actually incorporating these mechanisms in machine learning reinforcement learning algorithms is actually going to improve the generalizability of the trained agents. And so that's on a very high level, that's what we did. On a relatively more detailed level, we specifically focus on this so-called phenomenon called hippocampal replay, as I just described, where you can actually, so like I described previously, if you look at hippocampal place cells, they have unimodal firing fields across the state space, across the environments. And suppose that you have a linear track and the animal goes from one end to the other, and you can see that the place fields, the place cells with place fields located at the early part of the track, they get activated first, followed by the one with the place field next to it, and so on and so forth. So you can see the place cells, they fire in sequential ordering as the animal passes the environment.
So a place cell is a cell that fires when the animal is in a specific place.
In a specific place, yes, as the name tells,
Huh.
yes.
But are there enough cells for that? I mean, there's a lot of spaces the animal could be in.
Yeah, there are enough cells. I mean, there are too many enough cells to be honest. Like because
Hmm.
only, I mean, you must heard the story. Like only part of our brain are actually active at a time, and then we still hold the potential to actually unlock all of it. It's not entirely true. Well, I don't think it's entirely true from my end. It's really, I mean, I think what most people are referring to are the hippocampus, where, it's a very sparse representation that only probably 20% or less of the neurons are active for each environment. And so even with 20% of the cells active, you can still cover the entire state space. I mean, there are many studies in the hippocampus. Hippocampus is kind of like the machine learning of neuroscience. So it's being very actively studied. So there are many data supporting different empirical observations. So, but the common consensus is that they are a sufficient code for representing the allocentric in allocentric reference frame, the allocentric spatial location of the animal. So even with a 20% of the population firing at a time. So as the animal traverses the environments, you can see the place cells they got activated in sequence order, but when the animal reaches the end, when the animal actually is resting or is sleeping in offline environments, you can actually still do recordings, but their recordings, especially in sleep, you must have heard of something like non-REM sleep or something like where rapid eye movement sleep.
Hmm.
during these periods, there's just I mean, this is the behavioral, right? Because you're tracking the eyeball movement. But if you do recording, and then if you record the local field potential of the brain, which is like the whole brain activity of the brain, and then you can see that there's an increase, like sometimes there's an increase in power in the frequency power associated with the frequency band between somewhere between 50 and 120 hertz is the so-called gamma band. So you can see that there's a lot of neurons firing in synchrony, and this is thing called sharp ripples. And then if you actually decode if you look at the place cells specifically during these sharp ripple events, and then you can decode them according to their previous activities during the active locomotions, you can see that they actually fire in sequence order or reverse sequence order as per their previous experience. And so people have been thinking that it might be suggesting that the animal is using these sharp ripples to actually do memory consolidation, or they can. There are also been some studies that sharp ripples actually afford place cell activities that is predictive representation of future events. So it might also be doing some sort of like planning and predictive planning. And so, but in any case, these sequence dynamics during these sharp ripples is very useful. And so we have been translating this specifically because, like I just mentioned, the sharp ripples, sorry, the hippocampal replay, it can either come in the forward direction as how the animal has experienced the environment or the task, but it also comes in the reverse direction, how everything leads up to the goal. And so we kind of take this inspiration that there is a coexistence of forward and reverse hippocampal replay, and translates them into model-based reinforcement learning and to train world models, such as not only using predictive reconstruction in the temporally forward direction, but also to train them in the temporally backward direction using some approximation, obviously.
Yeah, my guess would be that predicting forward is a good way to build an accurate world model, and
Yeah,
predicting backwards is a good way to try and improve your ability to plan. It's like, what action led to this outcome?
exactly. And also, we think that this also we specifically, for this, we specifically works on. I mean, that's a good point, because we also built a model on intrinsic motivation based on the similar inspirations. That forward and backward propagations, they might convey different information. So in terms of like intrinsic motivations, if you want to go to places that are infrequently visited because they bear more uncertainty, so you want to understand it a bit more. But you also want to go to places where it empowers more transitions, right? So consider two rooms that is interconnected with only one channel state, and so you might. So despite this channel state or this corridor state has been visited very, very often, but you still want to traverse it to go to the other side of the room to go back and forth. But if you only use the temporally forward predictive representation, then you've never actually, well, you very infrequently traverse this corridor state, so you don't really go to the other room. But if you actually take the temporally backwards information into account, then it gives you an intrinsic motivation to actually traverse states that leads to every other state. And so that's also one way of translating the insights from hippocampal replay into a actionable reinforcement learning objective. But back to the model-based side, what we think is that because we were specifically working on at the time, we were specifically working on how to empirically validate the methods. And one thing that is particularly suitable is the so-called continuous control tasks, where you must have heard of it, this kind of a Mojoko task where you control this little androids to move around, walk, run, and hop, those kind of things. And so in physical world, because I mean, like most of our embodied intelligence is actually embodied in the physical world. And if you want to build a world model for the physical interactions, and we should note that there is a sense of temporal cycle consistency existing in the physical world, where if you take a step outwards, and then there is a simultaneously there is an action, reverse action that could take your step back to your standing pose. And so this is why we can actually leverage one forward transition, one interaction with the environment. So it simultaneously provides you two supervisory signals for training your world model, one forward, one backward. And so this will significantly improves the sample efficiency of the learning of the world model, but also simultaneously embeds the inductive bias of the temporal cycle consistency of the physical world model into the learned model. And so overall, this turns out to be a quite successful strategy for training model-based reinforcement learning, and it really improves zero-shot generalizability, and also like as expected, it significantly improves the sample efficiency of learning, and so it turns out to be a quite successful translation. So both of the things I just mentioned to you, because that, so those two things comprise the second part of my thesis, and so both of them actually turned out to be working pretty well and were quite well accepted in the machine learning community.
So experience replay has been a part of reinforcement learning for quite a while now with
Yeah.
so-called dreaming or whatever. But
Yeah.
this seems not just an intuitive extension of what's going on in animals, but a really direct analog with the actual activity going on in the hippocampus applied to RL algorithms. And
Yeah.
did that work better than the other kind of naive experience replay methods?
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, like you just mentioned, like experience replay has been one of the standard, procedures in deep reinforcement learning. And I mean, for instance, you can't train a deep Q network without experience replay. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've never been able to do that as far as I go. So yes, I mean, like obviously. These days, if you want to publish a paper, you have to compare to a bunch of baselines, and so that's exactly what we did with
Mm.
a bunch of like state of the art at the time state of the art benchmarks with obviously augmented with experience replay, and our methods like just outperforms all of them. So that's, and I think the most important part is not only that, you know, they learn, I mean the methods could train the agent, the reinforcement agent, to asymptotes within a shorter period of time, but more importantly, they actually improve the generalizability of the trained agents, which is like we were really surprised that it actually coheres with our initial hypothesis that, we, because it's still like everything in neuroscience, almost everything in neuroscience is merely a conjecture. So like in hippocampal replay, the influential conjecture is that it supports generalization, and if you cut it off, it doesn't really. There are ways that you can do inhibition to the hippocampus, such as it kills off the sharp ripples and henceforth kills off the hippocampal replay sequences, and you can see that killing it off actually like really harms the spatial the forthcoming spatial navigation performance of the rats or the mice, and so also in terms of generalizability, transferability. And so in our case, we saw that the similar, it's only a small part of the many dynamical properties of hippocampal replay, but even a small part of it could translate to a successful learning algorithms that improves the zero-shot generalizability of the trained agents, which we find satisfying, which I find satisfying at least.
Yeah, sure. It's super interesting. So did you do any internships during your PhD?
I did quite a few actually. I mean, industrial internships. I worked at Microsoft Research. I worked at Meta. I also visited Harvard for 6 months. Also, thanks to the funding by the DeepMind Scholarship, which is lovely. Um, but so that's pretty much it. I also interned at Huawei. Yes, yes. My first internship was with Huawei. Yes.
Presumably, they don't have a computational neuroscience group.
No, no, they don't at all. I mean, like initially, actually, um, I started my PhD in 2019, right? And around the time of 2020, after I had published my first paper on computational neuroscience, I I was actually overwhelmed by, by the prospects of machine learning, which I thought it was like a really, really, I mean, it's an interesting and promising field to step into. So that's why I actually started working on reinforcement learning because I kind of like believe in the potential of this. And I mean, it seemed to me at the time that the quickest way to actually get into the field is actually to do an industrial placement to join, because at the time, industrial research is very different. Well, it's to some extent quite different from what they are these days, because industrial research at the time, they are really just, it seems to be like they are research labs just in a industry setting, but
Yeah.
they have better computational resources. But you are still, to some extent, I mean, FAIR and DeepMinds, you are still free Microsoft Research. You are still free to do whatever you like.
Could you tell us briefly what you did at Microsoft during your internship there?
Yeah. So I joined Microsoft in 2021. So which is about the time where everyone had been starting thinking about using transformers or large language foundational models to do things, to do
Mm.
various things. And I joined a team called the Natural Intelligence team, where we were starting to using a so-called Alberta model, which is like a variant of the BERT architecture of the transformers, to actually to train on protein sequences or biological sequences to build a foundation. Well, if you want to, in modern terms, to build a foundational model for biological sequences. And I was part of the team of doing that research. And so that was also my first experience with these kind of large models, large language models as well.
Was that after AlphaFold?
I think it was after AlphaFold, actually. Yeah, because yeah, no, you're fair to ask. I definitely think it's after AlphaFold because I don't think Microsoft was the first one working on this, and then there was already published research that you can predict protein sequences quite well. But I don't think AlphaFold at the time was actually built on the transformer architecture, and then I think Microsoft
Mm.
was actually one of the, and also Fair at the same time. They were also actually building a similar biological sequence foundation models, and but Microsoft is like at the time I think it was like full, like really fully on that.
Mm. And what were you doing at Meta?
I was working on well, for that I was actually working more on computational neuroscience, but it's like a blending between computational neuroscience and machine learning. I was using denoising, well, in modern terms, diffusion models. I was using diffusion models to build a Janssen model for a so-called EMG signals, where you can actually use, the recently publicized wristband of Meta's products. And then you can actually record the EMG, the muscle electrophysiological signals from your wristband, which is usually noisy. But the problem with so you want to train a descriptive model on top of these data to predict the hand gestures of the given the muscle signals. But the problem is that the recording is usually noisy and it's demographic dependent, and it's very expensive to collect. So we were thinking about like how can we do data augmentation on top of the relatively smaller amount of data that we already have, well, which is still quite substantial amount of data. And so because my expertise lies in building probabilistic Janssen models, and also at the time, diffusion models are really, really popular. And, but I don't think people have been thinking about applying it for neural data about the time when I was doing my internship. So we were probably the first people to actually apply, one of the first groups to actually apply diffusion models for this kind of high dimensional time series of neural data to do Janssen modeling. But also around the same time, Jakob Mark at Max Planck, I think, their group also actually published a preprint at the time, actually also working on using diffusion models for EMG, not for EMG, but for EEG, so which is like a whole brain, not for the the muscle, not for the wrist, but for the whole brain's recording.
So this wristband, the idea is that you make gestures with your hand and it reads the muscle motions from your
Yep.
wrist, from the electrical signals in your wrist, and then you're able to control. Uh,
Yeah, you are able to control like some sort of like imagine that you are working with Apple VR or I don't know how Apple calls it, but it's really like augmented reality that Apple actually uses computer vision that they have like 12, I don't know how many now, high resolution cameras at the bottom of the lens to actually to track your hand gestures, right? So that's Apple's approach, and Meta's
mhm.
approach was to actually, I mean, it's not a secret anymore, but I mean, Meta's approach is to actually use this EMG wristband to actually to do gesture predictions and also handwriting, which is also another team that has been working on, and also many other things as well. But I was specifically working on gesture prediction.
So then the problem is that the electrical signals, as they pass through the skin and other muscles and tendons to the wristband around your wrist, a
Yeah.
lot of noise. The signal gets very noisy, and your task is to try and get rid of that noise to figure out what the underlying muscle signals were, and then translate them into gestures.
Well, I mean, part of the team is doing that, right? So how to get rid of the noise. My job was to actually to how, like I said, the data collection because you require actual human participants to actually do the data collection, and it's usually expensive and biased to some extent. Even though that you're trying to be unbiased, as unbiased as possible, but there's nevertheless bias.
What's the bias?
Like like the first thing is um the BMI of the person,
Huh,
like the
okay.
body mass index. Like if you are a chubby person or if you're a skinny person, then your recording might be vastly different from each other. And then
Mm,
there's a
mhm.
huge domain shift there. And well, yeah. And so how do you get rid of that? Or so what we our approach is to actually to build conditional diffusion models to do generative modeling, to do conditional data augmentation, to and then for maximally unbiased descriptive training of the downstream classifier. And so that's my part of the job.
So you would condition on their height, age, gender, BMI, that kind of thing, and then try and denoise it given that knowledge?
Yeah. So we can do some pre-processing to cluster the participants into different groups, and then um, we can train a collective diffusion model, diffusion model, given the conditioning labels I mean, we can train condition specific diffusion models, but there will actually in that way you will actually lack the potential to actually to discover the shared patterns across different groups. So
Mm.
training a conditional diffusion model allows you to both to track group specific features and also globally shared features.
I see. So the user wouldn't have to enter their BMI into the wristwatch.
It's not necessarily just the BMI. It's a mixture of multiple things. Like, I mean, like some people move a lot, right? Some people when they do
Mm.
gestures and then they actually they also swing a lot, and so that's as you can imagine, it's a band, right? So it rotates around your wrist, and so we have there's another thing is that how do we also accommodate such rotational invariance structure in the recordings and also there's also like demographics wise, I mean gender wise, there's a bunch of things that we don't want to really like specifically carve out the actual groups like by hand. So we want to automatically discover them. So that's why we actually do the pre-processing to do the clustering in a pure data-driven manner instead of like injecting our own biases into them.
Yeah, sure. So then in the first few gestures, the algorithm would figure out which cluster you're in.
Exactly. So we need, um, so I mean that's an engineering problem, right? So there's obviously an engineering problem. How do you? I mean, even if we have trained a class conditioned or conditional diffusion models for this, how do we actually, given the first few interactions with the wristband, we can quickly identify which group that you are most likely belong to? Kind of like I would say to some extent, it's kind of like if you are doing I don't know, Face ID for iPhone, and then so they already have a powerful classifier, but you still need a few like initial samples to actually collect specific features pertinent to the user itself to actually to
Mm.
and then to augment the classifier more tailored or personalized.
I see that. That's super interesting. And the last thing we didn't talk about is what you were up to at Harvard. What did you do there?
There was a professor at Harvard, Sam Gershman, which I really, really admires, and his works and his productivity is amazing. He published like 60 papers a year, and which is
Oh my God.
ridiculous. And many of them are actually single authored papers where he's like extremely prolific. And but he's also like genuinely a nice person, as incredibly smart researcher. So I thought, and I had some idea working. I was actually at the time I was trying to get away because at the time I was disappointed with how people are switching, how people in the machine learning field are losing focus on the things that I think are useful and important, but switching to foundation models or large language models, and so I think. And I just think that I have always been interested in neuroscience and but also potentially in cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience. And Sam Gershman is one of the big names in and also like the Boston area, like with MIT, you have Josh Tannenbaum, and you have Thomas Woolman, and you have all those wonderful cognitive scientists, and so I thought it was, and also you have a bunch of theoretical neuroscientists as well. So I thought it was a good place for me to actually to get to know cognitive science, to get into the field to see if it's actually fitting for me, and uh, do I want to choose cognitive science as my main field of research moving forward, or computational neuroscience, because I was already like starting doing the computational neuroscience at the time, so I already knew what I want to do in computational neuroscience, but I didn't know much about cognitive science. So that's why I went to Harvard in the first place, and spent 6 months there talking to many people, working with Sam, but also working with other neuroscientists as well, like Jan Drugovich. And I really enjoyed the trip. So it was more of an academic trip rather than an internship. It was not really an internship. Yeah, but
Mm.
it was like just a fun sabbatical visit to another university and another country as well. So, and at the time I was actually really keen on moving to the States for my postdoc, and which I did actually, which I already had a couple of offers, which I somehow, due to personal reasons, family reasons, I didn't join in the end. But still, like I get to socialize with many American neuroscientists, which is really really lovely.
And what have you been up to after the PhD?
Yeah, so we have decided, my partner and I have decided to stay in the UK after the PhD, and so I contacted Matti Langil, which is a computational neuroscientist at Cambridge, which is who also did his postdoc at the Gatsby with Peter Diane. And we work on similar, well, I work on similar stuff as he does. I work on Bayesian normative modeling of hippocampal of neural systems. And so I contacted him, and we had the interview and everything, and the visits and everything, um and I was offered the place, so just took it, and I stayed in Cambridge since the start of 2024, and then we've just been working on like pure computational neuroscience, like as I said. So currently, from the start of my PhD, postdoc, I have just not really been working too much on machine learning. I've been really focusing on using machine learning or building machine learning models that is more tailored for explaining neural systems rather than just building neural-inspired machine learning algorithms for solving general tasks. And so yeah, so that's what I've been up to with Mate. And specifically, I've been moving like I said. So I'm mostly interested in generalization. That's actually something that I've only discovered after the start of my postdoc. So So I've been building normative models for a so-called thing called hippocampal remapping, where you can actually see that the population of hippocampal neurons, they actually shift or disorient or just completely change their firing fields upon switches of task context. And then so we want to build a norm, and there's a lot of the conflicting experimental data in the field as well. So we want to build a unifying theory for this model, and so that's what we have been up to, the main part of the theoretical modeling part of my postdoc studies.
So, what's your impression of the AI field as a whole right now?
I mean, I don't believe scaling up is the only way to go. I absolutely don't believe that. I think machine learning has really shifted from being from back in the days 2010 or ish or all the way to 2015 and all the time before that. I mean, machine learning has really been a really fascinating mixture of statistics, physics, and math, and which I really enjoyed reading those literature. And I think the machine learning research these days has become an engineering heavy field, and it's not really about. I mean, I think the field is not really asking the interesting questions anymore, but rather trying to build products that scales, that works, that productionize, and which I think is fair in some sense, but it's not a field that I'm interested in because my research interest has always been involved with like what characterizes intelligence and how I mean, if you're trying to build artificial general intelligence, if you want to call it that, then you can't really I mean us biolog if you're I mean again it comes back to the debate that do you need wings, do you need a bird like wings to build a plane? You don't, right? So but I mean, like, but you can't really say a plane is doing birds like flying. So it's a different things, right? So if we are trying to build like artificial general intelligence in the way that's how biological intelligence like is born out of the evolution and everything, that I don't think this is the right way to go. I think, but if you're trying to build powerful products that is like useful for everything and personalized agents and everything, robotics and those kind of things, then yeah, probably scaling up and doing all the engineering tweaks is probably the right thing to do. Yes, but that's not again, like I said, so that's not my field of interest. So yeah,
Why
what do you
should
think?
we build AGI? Why is that the goal?
I mean, I can see how this is like useful, right? I mean, AGI could be potential. I mean, I'm using ChatGPT every day, to be honest. Like, it's really to some extent, I think it's a useful thing in terms of like replacing some of the cumbersome hard labors in your daily works. Like, for instance, if I'm actually trying to draft a skeleton of a code base that I'm trying to develop from scratch, then to be honest, the usual practice is always going to be read through some other people's code base and to get a sense of how the skeleton is going to span out, and then to build your own skeleton. But I mean, ChatGPT is probably just without me even trying to go through all the code bases on GitHub, it will already give me a really, especially now, I mean, with GPT-5 and everything, so it's really giving me a working version of a code base to start working with. So which I really thank them for. But I think that that's useful again in the engineering sense. What I wouldn't use AGI or ChatGPT or anything like that, Claude, for is to actually to replace thinking. And I think is probably one of the most important things. I mean, like because there are recent research saying that after you have used ChatGPT, a certain part of your brain that is sort of like if you do fMRI studies, then you can see certain part of the brain involved in I don't know, logical thinking is actually kind of, you can see some sort of the degradation in the, or less activation in the part of the brain. So which I kind of think that the again, I think the hallmark of biological intelligence is this kind of a flexible critical thinking that allows well, the thought process that's and when I say thought process, it's not really just metaphysical. It's really just across all fields like motor, sensory, and all those kind of things.
But you're saying if we did create an AGI that could do logical thinking, then we shouldn't use it because it would degrade our own logical thinking?
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, like this really goes back. I mean, we don't have really. I don't think we have the time to go through all of that. But my view on um, the LLMs at this stage, the foundation models at this stage, at least. I mean, I'm maybe future papers is going to change me, but again, I'm not staying on top of the literature in LLMs at the moment. But uh, back during the time when I was at Microsoft, when I started working on LLMs, and um, and I was thinking about using LLMs for reinforcement learning, and I play with it, and I also read a few papers that's starting to do that. And my general impression is that LLMs they don't extrapolate; they do extremely well interpolations, and they draw interpolations where people haven't thought about, like different knowledge nodes in if you imagine that all of our skills and knowledge of human beings rely on a huge knowledge graph, then we definitely haven't really exhausted all the pairwise connections, all the clicks in the graph.
Mm-hmm.
So I think LLMs are extremely well reversed in that. But I don't think they can. I mean, so far, I don't think they can extrapolate out of the knowledge base that we already have. And I think that requires like human, actual critical thinkings of human involvement. And
Yeah, so I mean, if you think it would be a bad thing if we created AGI, then maybe it's a good thing that the field is currently stuck on LLMs, which you don't believe are going to get there.
yeah, yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's in a nutshell. That's what I said. Yes. I mean, like, I'm probably one of the few people still thinking that. I mean, most people still believe. I mean, most people are strong supporters for LLMs and foundation models. But I mean, like, this is only a neuroscientist perspective. So,
My final question will be, do you have any advice for PhD students or students about to embark on a PhD?
I mean, my advice is to not trying to publish as much as possible. I mean, like, you easily get lost in the um I mean, like at the start of your PhD, you see all your peers and all the students like ahead of you, like just publishing in all those conferences and like well reputed conferences that you might get anxious. And my genuine advice is just don't. I mean, like don't. I mean, I think it's more important I think it's way more important to actually to find the right question and the um, rather than just just asking a random question and solve that random question. But really, I mean, to formulate in some sense, if I want to summarize as it is that I think research taste is probably one of the most important thing for a scientist. If you want to be a scientist, obviously. But if you want to be an engineer, that's a different side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. You can end up sinking a lot of time into a question that, in hindsight, doesn't actually make that much sense or isn't important.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
All right, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today. Where can people find you online if they want to hear more from you, Changmin?
I mean, they can obviously reach me through. I mean, I have a Twitter, and then you can always search my name, and then it will pop up. And I mean, my email address. If you just Google Changmin Yu, and then my personal website is on there. It's a GitHub IO website, so you will find my contact details there as well. So yeah, and all my papers has my email on them. So
All right, I enjoyed chatting. Thanks so much for coming on, Changmin Yu.
yeah, thanks for having me, Ruben.